The Cold War in the 1970s was not just fought with missiles and microphones, it was fought between the satin sheets of London's most exclusive apartments. While the public watched them on the silver screen, British intelligence knew that a beautiful actress was the ultimate weapon. This is the secret history of the women who were caught in the crossfire between MI5 and the KGB. Some were willing patriots, others were manipulated victims, but all of them found that the price of fame included sleeping with the enemy. Were they spies or just lovers? Subscribe and comment to uncover the truth. Fiona Fullerton. In the world of espionage, life often imitates art, but for Fiona Fullerton, the line between playing a Bond girl and living the life of one became terrifyingly blurred. Known to millions as the stunning Paula Ivanova in A View to a Kill, Fullerton was the epitome of the icy, sophisticated British beauty that the camera loved. However, her most dangerous role was not opposite Roger Moore, but in her real-life friendship with a man named Oleg Gordievsky. In the paranoid atmosphere of the late 1970s and early 80s, Gordievsky was a figure of immense interest. To the world, and to Fiona, he was a charming cultural attaché at the Soviet embassy in London. In reality, he was a high-ranking KGB officer who was secretly working as a double agent for British intelligence. The relationship between the glamorous actress and the Soviet spy was a masterclass in manipulation. Gordievsky was infatuated with her, a fact that did not go unnoticed by the handlers at MI5 and MI6. Documents released years later suggested a cold calculation on the part of the British authorities. They allowed, and perhaps even encouraged, the actress to maintain this close connection. The logic was ruthless. As long as the KGB man was distracted by his affection for a British film star, he might let his guard down. Fullerton was effectively used as a beautiful distraction, a honey trap in reverse, keeping the enemy occupied with candlelight dinners and long conversations while the Secret Service monitored every move. For Fullerton, the experience was bewildering. She later described Gordievsky as a perfect gentleman, a man of intellect and charm, completely unaware that their friendship was being dissected in smoke-filled rooms by men in grey suits. She was living in a bubble of celebrity while he was living on a knife edge of treason. The press, naturally, sensed a scandal. Rumors swirled about the nature of their bond. Was she passing information? Was she being groomed? The truth was far more subtle. She was the innocent conduit, the glamorous cover that allowed a spy to operate in high society without raising suspicion. When Gordievsky was finally exfiltrated from Moscow in a daring operation, the true extent of his double life was revealed, leaving Fullerton to realize she had been a player in a game she did not even know she was playing. The emotional toll of such a revelation is hard to overstate. To discover that your charming dinner companion is a central figure in a global conflict and that your own government viewed you merely as a pawn to keep him happy is a heavy burden. It speaks to the cynicism of the British Secret Services during this era. They saw actresses not as citizens to be protected, but as assets to be deployed. Fiona Fullerton's story remains a chilling reminder that in the eyes of the state, beauty is just another resource to be exploited, and a famous face can be the best mask for a secret operation. She was the Bond girl who didn't get a script, just a dossier filed away in a government basement. Norma Levy. While not a traditional actress in the Shakespearean sense, Norma Levy played the lead role in a political drama that nearly brought down the British government in 1973. A stunning model and high-end companion, she operated in the shadowy world where aristocracy met the underworld. The scandal that erupted around her was not just about illicit affairs, it was about national security, blackmail, and the terrifying reach of MI5. Levy was the woman at the center of the Lambton affair, a scandal involving Anthony Lambton, a conservative minister and cousin of the Prime Minister. But this was not a simple case of a politician behaving badly. It was a calculated operation where the bedroom became a battlefield. The twist in the tale was the involvement of her husband, Colin Levy. He was not just a passive observer, he was the director of this sordid play. Using hidden cameras and microphones, he recorded the intimate encounters between his wife and the minister. The question that has haunted historians is, why? Was it simple blackmail for money, or was there a darker hand at work? At the time, intelligence services were paranoid about Soviet infiltration. A minister compromising himself with a woman who had loose connections to various international figures was a security nightmare. MI5 began to monitor Levy aggressively. They were not protecting her, they were watching to see who else walked through her door. She became a lens through which the Secret Service could spy on the moral decay of the ruling class. The atmosphere around Norma Levy was thick with the threat of foreign influence. There were whispers, never fully substantiated but persistently investigated by Special Branch, that the photographs taken of the minister were destined for foreign hands. If the KGB could get hold of compromising material on a British defense minister, the leverage would be catastrophic. Levy found herself at the center of a storm where police raids and intelligence surveillance were daily occurrences. She was interrogated not just about her private life, but about her knowledge of state secrets that might have been whispered during pillow talk. The authorities treated her as a potential national security threat, a woman whose beauty could destabilize the government. When the story broke, it was a sensation. The press painted her as a modern-day Mata Hari, a seductress who lured powerful men to their doom. But behind the headlines was a frightened young woman caught in a web of surveillance. She was forced to flee the country, hounded by reporters and agents alike. The Levy affair exposed the ruthless pragmatism of the British establishment. They were willing to tear her life apart to protect their secrets. It was a classic example of a honey trap scenario, whether orchestrated by foreign powers or domestic blackmailers, where the woman is the bait and the weapon. Norma Levy's name became synonymous with the danger of mixing pleasure with politics, a living warning that when you sleep with power, you wake up with the secret police. Soraya Khashoggi. In the glittering, champagne-soaked world of the 1970s, Soraya Khashoggi was not just a woman, she was a geopolitical asset wrapped in silk. Born Sandra Daly, a working-class girl from Leicester, her transformation into Soraya, the wife of the world's richest arms dealer, Adnan Khashoggi, was the kind of fairy tale that usually hides a nightmare. While she dabbled in acting, appearing in the 1970 film The Adventurers, her primary stage was the high-stakes theater of international diplomacy and weapons trading. Her husband was the middleman between the West and the Middle East, brokering deals that shifted the balance of power in the Cold War. And right there in the center of it, hosting the parties and charming the generals, was Soraya. But she was not just a hostess, she was a listening device for British intelligence, whether she volunteered for the role or not. The British Secret Services, along with the American CIA, knew that the secrets to the world's biggest military contracts were not kept in safes, but whispered on the pillows of the Khashoggi superyacht, the Nabila. Soraya was the gatekeeper. MI5 files released decades later would hint at the intense level of surveillance that surrounded her. Every affair she had, and there were rumored to be many, was potential leverage. She was encouraged to mix with the most powerful men in the world, from politicians to princes. The intelligence agencies relied on her proximity to power. If a British minister or a foreign dignitary was spending the night in her guest room, the services wanted to know what was said. She was living in a golden cage where the walls had ears, and her social calendar was likely analyzed by analysts in Whitehall looking for an edge in the volatile oil markets of the 1970s. The pressure of this life was immense. Soraya was expected to be the perfect exotic trophy wife, facilitating deals worth hundreds of millions of pounds simply by pouring tea and looking devastatingly beautiful. It was a form of soft espionage. She used her charm to disarm suspicious clients, making them feel comfortable enough to sign contracts that would arm regimes across the globe. But the danger was real. In the world of arms dealing, knowledge is dangerous, and Soraya knew everything. She knew who was bribing whom, which governments were secretly buying weapons they publicly condemned, and which officials were compromised. This made her a target. There were constant fears of kidnapping or assassination, requiring a security detail that rivaled that of a head of state. She was a woman walking through a minefield in high heels. Her eventual divorce in 1974 was one of the most expensive and scandalous in history, but it did not end the scrutiny. Even as a single woman in London society, the intelligence files remained open. She had seen too much. The honey trap aspect of her life was unique because she was trapped in the honey herself. She had been the bait used by her husband to lure clients and the window used by the West to peer into the Arab world. Her story is a stark illustration of how beauty was monetized in the 1970s. She was a girl from Leicester who ended up playing the most dangerous game of all, used by men who saw her not as a person, but as a skeleton key to unlock the vaults of the Middle East. Her performance in the diplomatic arena was far more convincing and far more perilous than anything she ever did on a film set. Ingrid Pitt. If there was one actress in 1970 London who knew the true face of the Cold War, it was Ingrid Pitt. To the British public, she was the voluptuous star of Hammer horror films, like The Vampire Lovers, a woman who made audiences scream with delight. But her real life was more terrifying than any script. Born in Poland and a survivor of a concentration camp, she had famously escaped East Berlin in 1962 by swimming across the freezing River Spree, braving the searchlights and machine guns of the border guards. When she arrived in Britain and found fame, she became a person of intense interest to the Secret Intelligence Service. To MI5, she was not just a scream queen, she was a defector with knowledge of the Soviet system and, potentially, a target for the Stasi agents operating in London. The intelligence services were deeply suspicious of anyone who had crossed the Iron Curtain, even a movie star. There were whispers in the industry that Pitt's debriefings were not just about her escape, but about who she knew. In the 1970s, London was crawling with Eastern Bloc spies disguised as diplomats and cultural attachés. Who better to infiltrate their circles than a woman who spoke their language and dazzled them with her beauty? While Pitt publicly played the role of the glamorous actress, the rumor mill suggested a darker subtext. Was she asked to identify agents at the high society parties she attended? Did the price of her freedom include keeping her ears open for the men in grey suits? The Stasi never forgot her. For years, she lived with the silent threat that the East German secret police might try to snatch her back or silence her. Her car was once rammed off the road in a mysterious incident that many attributed to foreign agents. Yet, the British authorities used her symbolic value. She was the living proof that the West was better, a honey trap of freedom. She was paraded as the beauty who chose Britain over communism. But behind the scenes, the pressure was immense. She was a woman who had seen the worst of humanity, now navigating a world of fake blood and plastic fangs, all while knowing that real monsters might be watching her from the shadows of the studio lot. Her story is a testament to the fact that for some actresses, the most dangerous performance was simply staying alive. Britt Ekland. By the mid-1970s, Britt Ekland was arguably the most photographed woman in Britain. The Swedish bombshell had been a Bond girl in The Man with the Golden Gun and was the former wife of Peter Sellers. But it was her romance with Patrick Litchfield, the cousin of the Queen, that set the alarm bells ringing in the corridors of MI5. In the paranoia of the 70s, the royal family was considered the ultimate target for foreign intelligence. A foreign actress, no matter how famous, sleeping her way into the inner circle of the monarchy was a security nightmare. The secret services had to know. Was she just in love, or was she a risk? The surveillance on Ekland during this period was reportedly intense. When you date a member of the royal household, you do not just get a boyfriend. You get a vetting process that strips your life bare. Every phone call, every letter, and every past association was scrutinized. There were fears that her loose connections in the entertainment world could be exploited by the KGB to blackmail the royals. The honey trap scenario here was not that she was a spy, but that she was the perfect vehicle for one. If a foreign agent could get to Britt, they could get to the Queen's cousin, and through him, to the secrets of the palace. She was living in a goldfish bowl where the glass was made of bulletproof suspicion. The pressure on her relationships was suffocating. It is said that the men in grey suits made it very clear to her aristocratic lovers that she was a liability. The romance with Litchfield eventually ended, and while the official reasons were personal, the relief in Whitehall was palpable. She had flown too close to the sun. Britt Ekland's time in the 70s was a lesson in the limits of celebrity. You could be on the cover of every magazine and the star of the biggest movie of the year, but to the British establishment, you were just a security clearance waiting to be denied. She was the glamorous outsider who was allowed to play in the garden, but never trusted with the keys to the house. Imogen Hassall. In the dictionary of British cinema during the 1970s, the name Imogen Hassall was synonymous with a very specific brand of tragic glamour. Dubbed the Countess of Cleavage by a voracious tabloid press, she was the ultimate it girl, a woman whose beauty was so overwhelming that it frequently terrified the men who sought to possess her. While she appeared in films like Carry On Loving and cult horror classics, her true full-time occupation was navigating the treacherous waters of international high society. However, behind the flashbulbs and the red carpet appearances lay a darker narrative. Her soul had a penchant for falling in love with dangerous men, arms dealers, international gamblers, and playboys with diplomatic immunity. To British intelligence, she was not just a starlet, she was a unique entry point into a world that was otherwise closed to them. The 1970s was the golden age of the private arms trade, a time when deals that shifted the balance of Cold War power were made on yachts in the Mediterranean rather than in government offices. Imogen Hassel was a fixture in this world. She was the trophy on the arm of men who sold weapons to developing nations. Intelligence insiders have long whispered that her social life was of intense interest to MI5 and MI6. The theory was simple. If you want to know what a reclusive, paranoid arms dealer is planning, you do not tap his phone. You compromise his girlfriend. There were rumors that pressure was applied to her, subtle nudges from friends in high places, to maintain relationships with certain volatile figures simply because she was the only listening device they allowed in the room. She was an unwitting honey trap, a woman whose quest for love was weaponized by the state to keep tabs on the merchants of death. The psychological toll of this existence was catastrophic. Hassel was a woman of deep sensitivity who desperately wanted to be taken seriously as a dramatic actress. She studied at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art and joined the Royal Shakespeare Company, but the industry and the establishment refused to see past her physical assets. She was trapped in a cycle of being used. On screen, she was the eye candy. In her private life, she was the accessory to powerful men. And in the shadows, she was a person of interest to the security services. She was surrounded by people who wanted something from her body, her fame, or the secrets whispered to her in the dark, but almost no one who wanted to protect her. The protection offered by the authorities was likely more about protecting the intelligence she could provide than her own well-being. Her tragic end in 1980, when she passed away in a heartbreaking incident involving medication, was the final act of a life lived under unbearable pressure. She was only 38 years old. The press called it the end of a party girl, but in reality, it was the collapse of a woman who had been ground down by the machinery of exploitation. Imogen Hassel was the canary in the coal mine for the ruthlessness of the 70s. She proved that in a world of spies and arms dealers, a beautiful woman is often treated as nothing more than a disposable camera, used to capture the image of the enemy and then discarded when the film runs out. Her legacy is a haunting reminder that the most effective spies often do not even know they are on the payroll. Rula Lenska. In the mid-1970s, Rula Lenska was a face that everyone recognized, but few could quite place. With her striking red hair and aristocratic bearing, she became a fixture of British television, famously starring in the series Rock Follies. But beneath the surface of her celebrity lay a heritage that made her a figure of intense fascination for the British security services. Born Countess Rosa Marie Leopoldina Łubienska, she was Polish nobility in exile. Her family had fled the communist takeover, but in the paranoid chessboard of the Cold War, a Polish countess living in London was never just a civilian. The Polish People's Republic, PRL intelligence services, the SB, were notoriously aggressive in targeting the immigrant community, and Lenska was a high-profile target. To MI5, she was a potential point of contact, a woman who could be approached by foreign agents trying to leverage her family's history or her fame. The 70s were a time of détente, but the spy war in London was raging hotter than ever. The Eastern Bloc was desperate for cultural influence and intelligence. Agents often used the cover of cultural exchange or media interviews to approach high-profile figures. Lenska, with her fluent Polish and her visibility, was the perfect conduit. While there is no evidence she ever succumbed to such approaches, the very possibility put her under the microscope. Intelligence protocols of the time dictated that any prominent figure with family ties behind the Iron Curtain be watched. Was she being pressured? Were there threats against her relatives still in Poland? The British services needed to know if she was a liability or an asset. She was living in a strange limbo, celebrated as a British star but monitored as a Polish exile. The concept of the honey trap here took on a different form. It was not about seduction for secrets, but about emotional blackmail. The standard KGB and SB tactic was to approach an émigré with news of a sick relative or a promise of easy travel visas in exchange for favors. For a woman in the public eye, these favors could be as simple as introducing an attaché to a politician at a party. Lenska had to navigate her career while carrying the invisible baggage of her heritage. Every time she attended a diplomatic function or a film festival where Eastern Bloc representatives were present, the invisible eyes of the state were likely watching the interactions. She was a woman walking a tightrope between two worlds, the glamour of Western show business and the dark, coercive shadow of the Communist East. Her resilience in maintaining her career and her identity in the face of this pressure was remarkable. She became a symbol of the successful integration of the Polish community in Britain, but few understood the hidden cost of that status. Rula Lenska's story in the 70s serves as a reminder that the Cold War did not just happen in bunkers and war rooms. It happened in television studios and dressing rooms, where an actress's background could make her a pawn in a game of international leverage. She was the countess who conquered the screen, but she could never quite escape the political geography of her birth, proving that in the eyes of the spy agencies, your past is always present. Mandy Rice Davies. If Christine Keeler was the tragic victim of the British establishment's spy games, Mandy Rice Davies was the survivor who learned to play the game better than the spies themselves. By the 1970s, the dust of the Profumo affair had supposedly settled, but for Mandy, the file at MI5 was never closed. While she transitioned into a career as an actress and a successful businesswoman, opening a string of nightclubs and restaurants, the intelligence services remained fixated on her. To them, she was not just a former showgirl, she was a woman with a dangerous amount of leverage over the British ruling class. In the 70s, she moved between London and Tel Aviv, marrying an Israeli businessman, a move that placed her squarely on the radar of both MI6 and the Mossad. The honey trap narrative that had defined her youth in the 60s evolved into a more sophisticated form of suspicion in the 70s. Intelligence agencies operate on the principle that people do not change, and they viewed Mandy's high society connections in Israel as a potential backchannel for information. She was a woman who had seen the British government naked, quite literally, and her relocation to the Middle East during a time of intense geopolitical conflict made her a person of interest. There were persistent whispers in diplomatic circles that her nightclubs were listening posts, places where international businessmen and diplomats loosened their ties and their tongues. Whether she was an active participant or simply a hostess who knew how to keep a secret, the perception was that she was still part of the intelligence ecosystem. The British establishment treated her with a mixture of fear and fascination. In the 1970s, she appeared in films and television, trying to forge a legitimate artistic identity, yet every interview inevitably circled back to the spies and the ministers of her past. She famously stated, "He would, wouldn't he?" regarding a lord denying an affair, a phrase that encapsulated her refusal to be intimidated by power. But behind the brave face was the reality of a life lived under observation. The security services effectively blocked her from certain social circles and opportunities, ensuring that she remained at arm's length. They could not silence her, so they contained her. Her existence in the 70s was a constant battle to prove that she was more than just a pawn from a Cold War chessboard, all while knowing that the men in grey suits were still taking notes on everyone she kissed. Charlotte Rampling. If there was ever an actress who embodied the icy, impenetrable mystery of the Cold War, it was Charlotte Rampling. But her enigma was not just a result of her acting talent, it was in her blood. Rampling was not merely a star of the silver screen, she was the daughter of the establishment. Her father, Godfrey Rampling, was a high-ranking colonel in the British Army and a commander within NATO. In the paranoid atmosphere of the 1970s, this pedigree made Charlotte a person of extreme interest to both British intelligence and their Soviet counterparts. She was the colonel's daughter, a woman who grew up with state secrets whispered at the dinner table. To the security services, she was a high-value target, a woman whose rebellion could be weaponized against the very heart of the British military alliance. In the 70s, Rampling famously turned her back on the polite society she was born into, choosing instead to star in controversial, boundary-pushing films like The Night Porter. This film, which depicted a dark, obsessive relationship between a concentration camp survivor and a former Nazi officer, sent shockwaves through the British establishment. But for MI5, her bohemian lifestyle was a security nightmare. Intelligence files from the era suggest a deep concern that her wild associations in London and Italy could be used as a lever to compromise her father. The fear was the classic honey trap in reverse, that foreign agents would seduce or manipulate the daughter to gain access to the father's NATO briefing papers. She was watched, not because she was a spy, but because she was the potential Achilles heel of a NATO commander. The pressure of this surveillance was suffocating. Rampling fled the stifling atmosphere of London for Paris, seeking a place where she could be an artist rather than a security risk. But the shadow of the secret services followed her. In the circles of European high society, she was constantly surrounded by diplomats, attachés, and cultural officers who were often spies in disguise. They were drawn to her not just for her beauty, but for her last name. She had to develop a radar for danger, a sixth sense for when a charming conversation was actually an interrogation. She became a master of silence, famous for her look that gave nothing away. It was a defense mechanism honed by a lifetime of knowing that one slip of the tongue could cause an international incident. Her career in the 70s was a defiance of the safe path laid out for her. By choosing roles that explored the darkest corners of human psychology, she was perhaps trying to distance herself as much as possible from the rigid, secretive world of her father. Yet, to the intelligence analysts in Whitehall, she remained a file to be updated, a variable to be managed. Charlotte Rampling's story is a chilling reminder that in the Cold War, you did not have to sign the Official Secrets Act to be bound by it. Sometimes, simply being born into the right family was enough to ensure that the eyes of the state were watching you from the moment you woke up until the moment you turned out the light. She was the spy thriller heroine who refused to play the game, but who could never quite leave the board. Jean Seberg. To conclude our list, we must look at the most heartbreaking and terrifying example of what happens when the intelligence services decide to destroy a woman's life. While Jean Seberg was American by birth, she was the darling of European cinema, spending much of the 1970s living and working between Paris and London. She was the face of the French New Wave, an icon of style and grace. But beneath the pixie cut and the fragile smile, she was a woman being hunted to death. Her crime was not espionage in the traditional sense, it was her political conscience. Seberg was a vocal supporter of civil rights groups, including the Black Panthers, and she used her fame and fortune to support causes that the establishment found terrifying. In the paranoid atmosphere of the Cold War, this made her a target. The FBI, working in conjunction with European intelligence agencies, including British liaisons, launched one of the most vicious smear campaigns in history, known as COINTELPRO. The objective was not to arrest her, but to neutralize her. The method they chose was the ultimate invasion of her private life. They decided to weaponize her sexuality and her maternity. When Seberg became pregnant in 1970, the intelligence services planted a false story in the gossip columns of the world. They spread the lie that the baby was not fathered by her husband, the French novelist Romain Gary, but by a member of the Black Panthers. It was a calculated, racist lie designed to humiliate her, destroy her marriage, and ruin her reputation with the white, conservative audiences of Britain and America. The stress of this public crucifixion was unbearable. Seberg went into premature labor, and the baby, a little girl named Nina, died 2 days later. In a heartbreaking act of defiance, Seberg insisted on an open casket at the funeral to prove to the world that the child was white and that the spies had lied. Throughout the 1970s, the pressure never let up. She was convinced she was being followed, her phone tapped, and her house bugged. Friends in London and Paris dismissed her fears as paranoia, the ravings of a fragile actress losing her grip on reality. But she was right. Files released years later confirmed that she was indeed a priority target for the Five Eyes intelligence network. They hounded her, blacklisted her, and made her toxic to producers. The honey trap here was that they turned her own life into a trap. Every relationship she had was scrutinized, every lover was suspected of being an informant or a plant. She was a woman living in a glass prison constructed by men who saw her empathy as a threat to national security. The end came in 1979 in a parked car on a Paris street. Seberg was found dead, a bottle of barbiturates and a suicide note by her side. She was only 40 years old. The coroner ruled it a suicide, but her husband publicly blamed the intelligence services, stating that they had essentially murdered her by destroying her soul. Jean Seberg's story is the grim finale of the 70s. It reveals the absolute ruthlessness of the secret state. They did not just use actresses to seduce foreigners, they used the very concept of an actress's reputation as a weapon to silence dissent. She was the butterfly broken on the wheel of geopolitics, a tragic reminder that in the spy games of the Cold War, there were no limits, and innocence was no protection against a government that wanted to break you.